There comes a moment in every journey, especially after loving someone who kept you at a distance, when you must choose, will you keep begging for breadcrumbs or will you rise up and bake your own bread? See, the person who pulls away, who avoids closeness, who disappears when things get vulnerable, they're playing a game. A quiet game, one where they expect you to keep reaching. They want you to prove your worth, staying for. But what happens when you stop playing? The most powerful shift you can ever make isn't a dramatic confrontation. It's not begging. It's not posting cryptic quotes. It's not trying to look happy so they notice. No, it's a quiet, resolute exit from the emotional battlefield. It's saying, without words, I am not something to be figured out later. You want to make an avoidant regret losing you. Stop being available to someone who isn't available to you. Because here's the truth, avoidants don't regret losing you when you cry for them. They regret losing you when your silence becomes more deafening than your presence ever was. When you heal, genuinely heal, you stop orbiting their world. You stop waiting for the late night message. You stop analyzing the delay in their replies. You stop tying your worth to how much attention they give. That is when the real shift happens. Let them sit in the echo of your absence. Let them feel the void that your peace used to fill. Let them see you step into your full value, where you no longer confuse love with longing, attention with affection, chaos with chemistry. Avoidants don't regret you when you try harder. They regret you when you stop trying completely. Because now you're unpredictable. You're no longer a safety net. You're no longer the backup plan. You're no longer in the familiar role of the understanding one. You want to be unforgettable. Don't try to prove your worth to someone who was blind to it in the first place. Prove it to yourself. Grow into someone even you wouldn't want to lose. This is not about revenge. This is about reclaiming your story. Let them regret the moments they chose fear over intimacy. Let them regret not stepping up when they had someone rare. Let them wonder why you're no longer texting, calling, checking in, explaining yourself. Because when someone knows you're no longer theirs, not because you slammed the door, but because you walked away without needing closure, that is when the regret creeps in. Not all losses are loud. Some slip through quietly and become the loudest thing someone ever remembers. So stop trying to be remembered through noise. Be remembered through the weight of your absence. Build a life that's bigger, deeper, fuller. A life they no longer get to watch from the front row. That's how you make an avoidant regret losing you. Not by turning back, but by moving forward so powerfully they can't believe they ever let you go. When you've loved someone who is emotionally unavailable, someone who pulls away just as things start to get real, the most painful trap is believing that if you just give a little more, love a little harder, stay a little longer, they'll finally choose you. But that's the illusion. That's the emotional prison avoidants keep you in. They aren't giving fully, but they're giving just enough to keep you hoping. And you, full of love and longing, keep handing over your heart like maybe, just maybe, this time it'll be different. The most powerful thing you can ever do in that moment is this: withdraw your emotional investment. And this isn't about being cold. It's not a game. It's not punishment. It's a return to self-respect. See, your energy, your attention, your care, your affection is currency. And for too long, you've been spending it on someone who doesn't know how to receive it, who doesn't honor it, or worse, who fears it. You keep showing up with your heart wide open, hoping it'll soften them. But all it does is make them more comfortable in their avoidance because they know you'll always be there. Avoidants don't respond to closeness with closeness. They respond with distance. And every time you lean in, they take another step back. That's not love. That's just a cycle. And the only way to break it is to stop feeding it. The moment you withdraw your emotional investment, not out of spite, but from clarity, you reclaim your power. Suddenly, they don't have you on standby. You're no longer a given. You're no longer constantly proving, explaining, hoping. You become still. You become focused inward. And that's when everything shifts. Because here's the secret. Avoidants don't process regret in the middle of your effort. They process it in the silence after your absence. While you're there, pouring your heart out, they can't feel the consequences of their emotional detachment. But when you step back, when your emotional presence is no longer there to comfort them without requiring accountability, something changes. They start to notice the space, the The quiet, the gap, the lack of your warmth, your check-ins, your energy, they don't feel regret because you gave too little. They feel it when you finally stop giving. And it takes strength because your instinct will scream at you to do the opposite, to reach out again, to chase a response, to prove that you're still there, still trying, still loving. But love isn't meant to be an endurance test for the one who shows up. If you constantly have to earn your place in someone's life, you're not in love. You're in survival mode. So remove your emotional investment not as a tactic, but as a truth. If someone cannot meet you where you are, if they shrink every time you grow closer, they are not your person. And your energy deserves to be poured into something that reflects it back, into friends who show up, into goals that fulfill you, into healing that transforms you. Pulling your energy back doesn't make you heartless. It makes you whole. It tells the world and yourself that you are no longer available for half love, for conditional attention, for the pain of always waiting. You are choosing to reinvest in the one place that will never abandon you, your own becoming. That absence, that silence, that space where you used to give so much. That is where their regret will begin. There's something deeply transformative about choosing to heal, not just move on, not just distract yourself, but truly, intentionally heal after loving someone who could never meet you in the middle. Because loving an avoidant often leaves you questioning yourself. Was I too much? Did I expect too much? Was I the problem? The truth is, when you're constantly dealing with emotional distance, mixed signals, or disappearing acts, you begin to internalize their behavior as a reflection of your worth. And that's where the real wound begins. Not just from what they did, but from what you started to believe about yourself because of it. But healing is where you take your power back. It's where you begin to rewrite the story that pain tried to write for you. And more than that, it's where the regret starts to grow, not in them seeing you angry or broken, but in them watching you rise with grace, strength, and clarity. See, self-worth is magnetic. Not the kind that demands attention, but the kind that radiates peace. And when you begin to genuinely rebuild your self-worth, not perform confidence, not fake it for social media, but actually see yourself as valuable, you become someone no avoidant can forget. Because while they may be drawn to emotional chaos, they notice peace. And when they see you step into that peace, when they see you living your life, not to prove a point, but because you love who you're becoming, it disrupts their illusion that you needed them to feel whole. It's easy to look outward for validation after rejection, but true healing turns that search inward. It's asking yourself, why did I tolerate emotional starvation for so long? What was I trying to earn that should have already been mine? And when you begin to answer those questions honestly, you stop blaming yourself for what they lacked. You stop trying to fix what was never yours to carry. You realize that their inability to love deeply had nothing to do with your capacity to be loved. That's where transformation begins. Not in their apology, not in their return, but in your decision to stop trying to convince someone to choose you and instead choosing yourself. And the irony is, when you start showing up for yourself the way you once showed up for them, everything changes. You glow differently. You speak differently. You move with a quiet confidence that says, I know my value, and I don't chase confusion. You begin to attract people who are emotionally present, who mirror your growth, who see you not as someone to fix, but someone to love. That's what regret looks like to an avoidant. It's not about missing your texts or the way you made them feel safe. It's about realizing they lost the one person who was willing to stand in the fire with them, but who finally walked away because they refused to hold the flame. You don't need to scream that you've healed. You don't need to post about it or announce your glow up. Your energy will speak louder than any words. Your peace will say everything, and the life you build from that place, one that's no longer tethered to their absence, becomes the one they can't forget, because deep down they know you would have stayed if they'd shown up. But now you've outgrown the version of yourself that tolerated emotional crumbs. And that new version of you, that's the one they can't reach. That's the one they regret losing. There's a moment in every one-sided connection when you realize just how long you've been the only one holding it together. You've been the one texting first, initiating plans, making space, being patient, trying to understand, trying to be easygoing, hoping they'll one day give you what you're giving them. And you tell yourself it's just their attachment style, or maybe they're not ready, or maybe if you give them more time, they'll come around. But underneath all those justifications is one hard truth. You've been chasing someone who's perfectly fine being chased. Avoidants create a dynamic where they keep their distance emotionally or physically and wait to see how much you'll tolerate. They might not even do it consciously, but their behavior reinforces a pattern. You give more, they give less. And the more you try to fix it to make them feel safe, to earn their affection, the more they pull back. That imbalance becomes the entire foundation of the relationship, and without realizing it, you lose yourself trying to hold on to someone who never truly leaned in. The moment you break that pattern, everything changes. The moment you stop chasing, stop initiating, stop bending yourself to be more likable, more convenient, more accommodating, that's the moment they start to feel the weight of your absence. Because avoidants are used to people chasing them. They expect it. They've built their emotional walls so high that anyone who gets close has to climb for connection. So when you stop climbing, when you step back and say, if you want me, you're going to have to meet me here, you shatter the unspoken contract of that dynamic. Breaking the pattern of chasing is not about punishing the other person. It's about protecting your dignity. It's about realizing that love is not meant to be earned through effort alone. It's meant to be reciprocated. When you stop chasing, it forces the other person to either rise up and meet you or fall away completely, and either outcome is a win. Because if they fall away, you are always the only one holding it together. If they come forward, it means your value finally made more noise than your effort. This shift doesn't happen overnight. It takes courage to not text back right away. It takes strength to sit in the discomfort of silence when you're used to filling the space. It takes trust to believe that you don't need to perform to be loved. But once you stop chasing, something powerful happens inside you. You begin to reclaim the parts of yourself that you abandoned for their convenience. You start choosing your peace over their potential. You start valuing your time, your energy, your love, and you stop handing it to someone who only takes when it's easy. That shift doesn't go unnoticed. Avoidants may act indifferent at first, but make no mistake, they feel the difference. The silence feels louder, the lack of pursuit feels strange, and suddenly the person they could always count on to chase them has become a mystery. That's when they start wondering. That's when regret begins to creep in. Because you didn't beg, you didn't explain, you just stopped. You broke the rhythm, you interrupted the chase. And now, the only way forward is for them to come toward you or lose you entirely. When you stop chasing, you stop reinforcing the idea that your love has to be earned through over-functioning. You remind yourself and them that you are not a convenience. You are a connection. And if they can't show up, they don't get access. And in the end, what breaks the cycle isn't anger or desperation, it's stillness, it's calm, it's your quiet refusal to run towards someone who only ever walked away. There's a profound power in silence, especially after you've spent so much time trying to be heard. When you're dealing with someone who avoids emotional closeness, who shuts down when things get too real, your first instinct is often to explain, to reach out, to clarify your feelings in hopes that it might finally crack their walls. You want to be understood. You want them to know what they've done. But here's the truth. Words often do very little for someone who's mastered the art of emotional distance. They've heard the speeches, they've felt the tears, and still they remain detached. What they haven't felt, what truly disrupts their rhythm, is silence. Silence is not just the absence of sound, it's the presence of consequence. It says what your words never could. I'm no longer playing this game. When someone is used to you always reaching out, always fixing things, always holding the thread of the connection, your silence becomes deafening. It forces them to face the reality that something is different, that you've stopped explaining yourself, that you're no longer emotionally available to be their fallback, that you are no longer trying to earn a place in their life. Avoidants are used to people filling the silence. They know if they disappear, you'll come looking. If they withhold affection, you'll try harder. If they create emotional distance, you'll try to bridge the gap. But when you don't, when you step back and say nothing, they don't get to fall into that familiar pattern. They have to sit with the discomfort. They have to wonder. And that's what breaks through their detachment more than any heartfelt message ever could. Because silence makes them feel your absence in a way that words never can. It removes the emotional safety net they've always had with you. They begin to question what happened, why you're no longer chasing, why the energy between you has shifted so drastically. And when someone has been emotionally unavailable, that shift doesn't feel small, it feels like an earthquake. Suddenly, the person who always showed up has gone still. Suddenly, they don't know where they stand. That uncertainty, that lack of control, creates a space where regret can finally grow. It's not about playing games. It's not about manipulation. It's about alignment. Silence is what happens when you stop betraying yourself for the sake of someone else's comfort. When you stop repeating the same conversation, hoping for a different outcome. When you realize that no amount of effort can make someone love you if they're committed to staying distant. So you stop giving your voice to someone who has made a habit of ignoring its meaning. And what happens then is subtle, but powerful. You begin to turn inward. You stop scanning your phone for their messages. You stop rehearsing what you'll say if they come back. You stop trying to write a better ending to a story they were never willing to co-author. Instead, you write a new chapter for yourself, quietly, without their audience, and that silence, that stillness becomes the loudest message of all. Because silence is clarity, it's strength. It's the line between trying to be chosen and finally choosing yourself. And while they may not admit it, while they may pretend not to notice, it changes everything. They feel the difference. They feel your absence. And for the first time, they're left alone with their choices. That is when they start to regret what they took for granted. You don't need to announce your healing. You don't need to tell them you've moved on. The silence will say it for you. There is a moment in every healing journey when you realize the most powerful thing you can do is build a life that no longer includes the person who didn't value you. Not out of spite, not out of revenge, but because your growth simply doesn't leave room for what was once acceptable. When you stop trying to win back the person who couldn't show up for you and start pouring all that effort into building a life that reflects your worth, something shifts, not just in you, but in the dynamic they once controlled. Avoidance often operate from a place of fear of intimacy, fear of vulnerability, fear of losing their independence. So when you were available, giving, consistent, and present, it didn't shake them. It felt safe for them to keep you at arm's length, knowing you'd stay close anyway. They didn't feel urgency because you hadn't left. But when you finally stop showing up, when you no longer seek them out, when your life starts expanding in ways they're not part of, that's when they feel it. That's when the regret begins to take root. You see, avoidants don't fear losing people who wait around. They fear losing people who outgrow them. And when you begin to build a life that they no longer have access to, a life that's fuller, freer, more joyful, they begin to see the contrast. They start to realize that they're no longer part of your story. While they're still stuck in patterns of emotional avoidance, you've moved on. Not just from them, but from the version of yourself who tolerated the emotional gaps they created. You stop living on standby. You start saying yes to new opportunities, new people, new joy. You stop explaining your heart to someone who never made space for it. And as your life begins to reflect your healing, it also begins to reflect the consequences of their inaction. Because now they don't just miss your presence. They miss the chance to grow alongside someone who would have given them everything. That's where the regret hits hardest. Not in your anger, not in your sadness, but in your elevation. In watching you become someone even more confident, more peaceful, more radiant. Someone they don't recognize anymore because they never took the time to truly know you. This is where your power lies. When you become unavailable to the person who once felt entitled to your love, you take yourself out of the emotional equation they were controlling. You become someone with boundaries, someone with direction, someone who doesn't settle for halfway. And avoidants who rely on others to close the distance are left to face what they lost. Not just a person, but a possibility, a connection that could have been something rare, something safe, something real, if only they had the courage to embrace it. But now you're no longer waiting. You've created a reality where their absence doesn't haunt you because your presence in your own life is finally enough. You've found joy they can't access, peace they can't disrupt, and love they can't dilute with inconsistency. And in the quiet moments, when they scroll past your smile, when they hear your name in passing, when they realize they have no idea who you've become, that's when it hits them. They didn't just lose someone who loved them. They lost someone who became unforgettable in their absence. Because the real regret isn't losing someone who begged to be seen. It's losing someone who eventually stopped trying and built a life that was no longer waiting for them to show up. So if you've ever found yourself loving someone who couldn't love you back the way you deserved, know this: it wasn't because you were too much. It wasn't because you weren't enough. It was because you were trying to offer depth to someone who was still afraid of drowning. But now you know better. Now you know that your energy is sacred, that your love is not something to be earned through games or silence or withdrawal. You've learned that chasing doesn't make someone stay. It only exhausts you. And when you finally stop, when you choose peace over pursuit, healing over hoping, growth over guessing, you become the kind of person who no longer fits inside the story of someone who didn't show up. You make them regret it, not through revenge or manipulation, but through evolution. You stop explaining. You stop begging. You stop accepting fragments of love and calling it almost. And instead, you become the person who honors their heart by no longer handing it to someone with closed hands. That's what makes you unforgettable. Not because you fought harder, but because you finally walked away. Not because you wanted them to suffer, but because you deserved to thrive. The regret they feel isn't about what they lost in the moment. It's about what they'll never get back again. Because once you've healed, once you've grown, once you've seen your own worth clearly, you don't shrink back into the person who waited. You move forward. And that is the greatest goodbye of all. Thank you for being here. Thank you for choosing your growth, your worth, your healing. This isn't just about making someone regret losing you. It's about never again losing yourself. And if you've made it this far, know this: you're already becoming someone they can't forget, but more importantly, someone you can be proud of. Keep rising, keep healing, keep becoming. Until next time, take care of your heart. It's rare, it's powerful, and it's yours.